the board. We're back in open session. Welcome, everyone. First up is we have a welcome from Principal Mr. Gehrman.
Thank you. Good evening, District 96 Board of Education, Superintendent Ryan Toy, and welcome to Ames for our COW meeting this evening. Always love hosting the COW meetings here at Ames, so it's good to brag about all the great stuff going on here at Ames. Give you a brief update on what we've been doing lately. The past few weeks have been all about fundraising and gardening. So our student council has been actively involved in some fundraising. They are led by Kelly Hall, who is our special education resource teacher here at Ames, and Natalie Geiger, first grade teacher. Very proud to announce we had a Chick-fil-A fundraiser where families got to go out to dinner at Chick-fil-A. We sold, I think in less than 3 hours, $2,050 worth of food, and Ames gets 25% of that back. So we received a check for $512.50 that we're going to use to help support some families in need in the area. We also just ended our Student Council Bring the Change fundraiser, and that was for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And very proud to report that our Ames families, just bringing in pocket change, raised $2,144 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So we're writing a check to them, and we'll be putting that in the mail to them. And also to gardening, I encourage you to stop by room 104. If you head down this hallway, hang a right before you go out door 5 again. David Becker's one of our new first grade teachers here, and he has a hydroponics garden in his classroom. He's growing lettuce, basil, and strawberries. The children have already brought home some lettuce to their families, and they use the basil to make some pasta sauce and had a little pasta luncheon in there. So, we don't have a lot of green space in Riverside, or at least in this area, but we're bringing the green space into Ames. So, once again, welcome, and hope have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Gehrman. Thanks for the update on the fundraising. It sounds really impressive, actually, raising so much money there. Also about the hydroponics. I enjoyed seeing that the last week or 2 weeks ago. So next up is we have public comment. Is there any public comment? If there's no public comment, does any board member have any proposed changes to the agenda? If there are none, then we move right on to the committee meetings. First committee is policy. Dan?
Yes, let's see. So we had a new issue of the IASB Press that came out. Discussed a number of policies, most of which, the ones, I think 3 out of the 4 of them listed, were updated to include, I clicked the wrong link. Let me click that one. So updated to include changes from the State Officials and Employee Ethics Act. There we go. A number of those changes had to do with areas about reporting sexual harassment, as well as putting a special emphasis upon the board acknowledging that. I think press is recommending, or actually, excuse me, the law requires that the board pass an independent notification or understanding, I guess, of the new act and the changes. The policy, according to IASB, is optional, but the state requires us to pass that act, and we've had a policy in place before, so I would assume we go forward with that again. There was also another policy about incurring debt that includes some changes about the superintendent notifying the board when a district feels a need in the coming horizon to incur debt. There are also some things about becoming more familiar with the finances of it, or having the superintendent provide that information to the board and having it available to the public as well. And I think on the agenda, that's not an updated policy, but we have listed here as well the fiscal goals and objective. We were talking about that one the last time around. I think in particular we were talking about the 40% cushion. And so that's in the policy that's listed here. And that's policy, what is that, 420.
Right, and that was just for reference because of the
Yes.
conversation that we had last meeting.
So any questions on that, or any thoughts?
Well, on that policy, it's sort of the way I read that policy is it says maintain a 40% fund balance as a percentage of expenditures for the operating funds on June 30th of each fiscal year. That sounds like it means just a 40% fund balance in the bank. It doesn't sound like it's sort of 40% net of debt. Is that how you read that, Dan?
Let's see, percent of expenditures. Yeah, so I would agree with you there.
Which to me is like, to me that's this far too, in my view, far too loose of a goal for the board to maintain fiscal strength. If you take on a ton of debt and you still have some money in the bank, 40% of your funding, that doesn't mean you're in a fiscally sound position. So I would argue for strengthening this policy if we want to change this policy to make this calculation net of debt. Basically, the 40% or whatever number we decide on will be net of our total debt. That would be my suggestion on that point.
I definitely see that making a lot of sense, and in particular in our position right now, it's definitely something that is we're easily obtaining and exceeding it. But you do make a good point there that we could be borrowing up to our gills and yet still have money in the bank to cover the policy efficiently.
Right.
Will you come up with a modification for that for the next board meeting?
I imagine, Martha, we can talk with our attorney on that.
Sure.
Yeah. Any further questions on any of the policies or the specific resolution regarding sexual harassment?
It's always fun when nobody says anything. No?
All right, that's it
We
for the
probably
policy.
didn't pass the resolution at the next board meeting.
The next board meeting, yes. That's it for the policy committee.
If I can, let me just want to add a little quick comment, if that's okay. Just in regards, Bob, you came just in time. Just in regards to the article you did about the attendance zones today, which is great because we want, if we're thinking about making a change in policy like that, we certainly want to communicate it to the community. But we just wanted to, or I was a little concerned because I have seen some Facebook comments and I just want to make sure there's clarification before people reach conclusions that might not be correct. So I just want to, speaking for the board, that we are committed to neighborhood schooling. We wouldn't be moving kids just to be even to schools far away, just to create 17 in each class or 19 in each class, but it would be based on this algorithm where it's on walking distance. So we would, in a situation where I live, I'm very close to 3 different schools. So it would be easy for my family to possibly go to one school versus the other because I'd still be in walking distance. So in no way what we're thinking of doing, and this certainly hasn't even been discussed much, would be changing the basic concept of what our community is committed to, which is neighborhood schooling. And trying to think of the other point I was going to say. One second.
Children won't be transferred. Like,
Yeah,
I think
and
it makes sense that children are going to be transferred.
So
like,
basically,
from places they already are attending.
the way I understand what we're thinking of doing, and I think it's a great time to have this conversation as we're embarking on facilities improvements, is that the changes in policy would really be reflective of what we're already living. So we already have a flexible boundary, yet we say attendance zones. So the only change would be removing the actual zone, so everything would still be flexible. Mm-hmm. And the idea would be that you would be, sent to the school that you're closest to.
I agree with what you said. And I think the article is very clear and very good.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some people sort of misunderstood it in the way that Linda said, which is that the goal would be to have strict equality between the schools. If there's 19 in one school and 23 in another, we would send people all the way across town to even out, and that's not the intention at all. Clearly not the intention.
And I know we try very hard not to move children across First Avenue, especially if the parents don't want that. So-
And that's actually something that the algorithm never does. It never moves kids from Hollywood unless you tell it to.
Unless they want.
Unless you say
Unless they ask
there's not
for it.
enough space at Hollywood. It will never do that because they're so far removed from everything else. It just doesn't happen. So. But I agree with your
Yeah,
comments.
so as we move forward, I just want to make sure we're,
Right.
I'm glad it's being communicated, and I just want to be very clear about it, since it feels like it might be a really big change, but it's more so just a change in the writing of the policy to actually be closer to what we're living.
Right, we haven't modified the policy, and we've
No.
actually looked at our policy, and I think there's an interesting question. Is this just a way to operationalize our current policy and then perhaps add clarity in the language over time? Because it seems like it's been somewhat confusing for people historically. So,
Yeah, I just wanted to take that.
I still
to
think
make a
we need to
comment.
change the policy. The policy is still, I think, very sort of ambiguous. But
bring clarity to it, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But we don't have that proposed change in front of us at this
No,
time.
no, and
Right.
I just wanted to, you see it happening, you just want to talk about it a little bit. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so then I guess next is Education Committee. Sherry?
We're going to hear from Ms. Brownlow and Ms. Belchenko, probably. I'm not sure who you got talking, but the teachers. Okay. I never know because she brings different people for our advanced learner update, and we'll look at the screen if you can peek far away. So.
Mayor, I'll take just a minute. One is a thank you to this committee, committee of I think 21 or 22 people, and some who are here tonight. And just kind of give a bit of a sort of introduction to the work and the presentation tonight, that this was a strategic plan goal, was to really look at a program review essentially of our advanced learning here in District 96. And I know that the work we do as educators every day is meeting the needs of all our learners, and that really takes a lot of careful planning and periodic review and evaluation, that this idea of periodic review and evaluation of the work we do, I think is always really important. And one of the things that really struck me, a phrase that I heard just recently from somebody from the Northwestern Center for Talent Development, talked about advanced learning, and they talked about how we consider not about being in or out of a program, but finding the right place and the right way to teach students. And I think that's really resonated with me as I was a part of this committee and sat through and was really part of many of the conversations, that I think that is absolutely the goal that this committee entered into in terms of finding that right place and that right way to teach students, with obviously a particular emphasis with this committee on our most advanced learners. And that I think what you're going to hear tonight, I know what you're going to hear tonight, is not about a particular program or a particular place or a particular thing that we do for children with advanced learning needs, but you're really going to hear about a combination of what's differentiation in the classroom, what acceleration opportunities kids have, and that the opportunity for pullouts when we're really looking to address specific student needs. I absolutely believe that the work that this committee is going to share is really very high quality, about high quality instruction, very student-centered in the approach, and very comprehensive overall. So again, I just want to thank the committee. I know this has been 2 years of thinking and planning, and now tonight sharing. So with that, Meryl, you can start it off. Thank you.
Around a few times. I feel like I'm in front of your screen, so I'll try to make sure you can see here. We're really excited to share the work with you this evening. As Martha, Mrs. Ryan Toy mentioned, it's been a long process, and our hope is that you'll see that our effort here is really to widen our net and to really cast it so that we're meeting the needs of all learners in the best way possible. So I did want to extend my thanks also, because I don't make decisions in isolation. We make them together as teams and as committees with stakeholder feedback. And so tonight you'll hear from a bunch of our committee members, and many of them are right here. So Catherine Dykes, Kim Eddy, Deb Folletti, Casimira Gorman, who's the principal at Blythe, Angela Jagus, Kelly King, and Rachel King. And Kelly, you don't see her on the committee list here. She wasn't a part of the original committee, but in these last few meetings when we've been sort of extending some of our ideas and brainstorming around how we best meet the needs of students, she has some specific training and background in working with gifted students and from our previous district, and also she is our tech integration specialist and is really focused on engaging our learners in the classroom with our classroom teachers. So she's got some background in some of the things you're going to hear about later. So she's also going to be presenting with us tonight. And then also in our audience, Lisa Gaynor was one of our parents on our committee, and of course, Mrs. Kleiber at the board table. And then Laura Belchenko, who was our consultant who guided some of our process, and she's now sitting as the chairperson on the Illinois State Board of Education's Gifted Advisory Committee. So she's just even recently come back with more policy and research that's aligning with some of what we're going to be sharing tonight, even hot off the press from IAGC in the quarterly. So we feel very blessed that we've had all of this help and support along the way. So I'm going to start, and there's our committee. You can see a robust list. The timeline. So as Martha mentioned, this process has been going on for almost 2 years, and it actually, the timeline for the actual committee Recruitment started in the fall of 2016, but actually in the spring summer of 2016, the group of advanced learning teachers came together with both at elementary and middle, and we really looked at the standards, the gifted standards, and what our mission was in terms of how we're serving students in District 96, and you'll see the mission statement on a forthcoming slide, but that work really began with that core group of teachers really examining what is our mission around serving our students, and then the gifted standards in that mission statement were brought forth as sort of the guiding document or framework from which we would then form the committee and conduct the work. So it will be 2 years, I think, in June, to be exact. And then in the fall of 2016, that was when we really launched the process, and we did a bunch of informational meetings for parents out in the buildings and recruited committee members and identified those that would participate. In the winter of 2017, we ran some focus groups with parents. We ran student focus group, and we did a big community-wide survey to gather input and feedback. Then when the spring of 2017 hit, we started to review our best practices and really look at the research behind how we serve students with advanced learning needs. And then we reviewed the community feedback, we examined the stakeholder feedback, we aggregated all of that, and we aligned the feedback and the research to the mission statement that was guiding the work. In the summer of 2017, we reviewed a variety of models and researchers that put forth various models around how to meet the needs of advanced learners. And we built some parameters with which to consider those based on the feedback we had received from stakeholders. And then in this past fall, we worked through various configurations and looked at our allocation of our current resources, both human and material, and services, and tried to respond to come up with something that would align with the mission and fulfill all of that input that we gathered. And it wasn't done in a session. It was done with a lot of what we like to call hole poking, which was all good in terms of parents, and teachers bringing forth questions and us rethinking and going back and rethinking until we thought we had it right. And then just this past winter in February, the committee reached a consensus around a program. I don't even like to call it a model. I'll say a continuum of services that will allow us to flexibly meet the needs of all of our students with advanced learning needs. So, timeline. So I'm going to turn over to Casimir Gorman, Blythe Park Principal, to talk a little bit about the mission statement.
Thanks, Meryl. Good evening. Thank you to Martha and to Meryl who provided that introduction. I think that what you had said about that not an in-and-out program or a particular program in general is something that stayed with my mind, and I believe the committee's mind throughout this entire process. So one of the major steps that we took in the very beginning was developing this mission statement, and it was a lot more of a rigorous process than I think that we first intended it to be, but it was something where we broke up into groups and we started to think about what we truly believed, what we wanted for our students, what we knew about children that perform above and beyond or that need something decidedly different. And then we also started to have discussions about those students that are those high achievers and that work hard and are looking to have their potential fulfilled. And we were looking at those two groups, and we wanted those opportunities for those students that are performing above and beyond. And then also distinguishing that group of high achievers who were looking at working hard and fulfilling that potential and making sure that we're capturing every opportunity to see those students in that light too. And so when we developed this mission statement, we were really looking with that to make sure that we were capturing all those students and in a way that was developmentally appropriate, and that we were creating multiple opportunities along a child's educational path to recognize that. And so if you look at that mission statement, it talks about both gifted and talented children. It talks about their specific educational needs, their social emotional needs. It talks about the idea that gifted and talented students exist across all socioeconomic strata and come from all races and both genders. And we wanted to make sure that it really spoke to us. And as we went through this process, I, for one, and I know the committee was so grateful that we took that time, because when we questioned what was our next step, or we were given the direction to come back and rethink something and take something apart, we went back to our mission statement about what we truly believed, and we used that as our guide to say, okay, this is our next step. This is what we really want for our children.
So back to me. So as you know, nothing that you do in a school district is done in a bubble. We like to also consider the big picture, just like we consider the whole child when we're educating children. So we were trying to really look within our existing structure around our resources and the talent and the people that we have. And I see a few of them popped into our audience already, and you'll hear about them later too. And just within our district, the various staff that could support these students, not only within their general education settings, but beyond. And so that was really one of the things we asked ourselves: how can we look within our existing resources to best meet the needs of our students? And look at our personnel. You know, do we have opportunities to really expand within job descriptions as they exist, and expand that talent to touch more of our students in a more intentional kind of way? And so we really paid attention to that as we were moving forward. And then we also recognized that there are initiatives outside of the advanced learning program that are also being considered district-wide. We have a big facility plan that is next on the agenda, and many other things happening programmatically. So really this intent to be flexible with our allocation of resources and maximizing our current strengths around staff and capacity was part of our work. I'm going to turn this over to Catherine Dykes.
I wanted to just take a moment to, do I need my name?
Because of the video.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay. As you can see in the slide, that we were really focusing on coming up with some ideas that would be a program that can flexibly support the students that we have in front of us. And I really want to kind of place emphasis on the second bullet point of this slide that says that our new core resources have really been key to provide our students with the support that they need. Casimir and I attended a conference and a year or so ago, and the phrase that stood out to me is that you want to create a continuum of services so that the gifted program is not the only safe place for these advanced learners to fall, that you have programs in place that can meet the needs effectively of all of your students. And the committees that selected Math in Focus and ReadyGen did a phenomenal job choosing the most amazing resources that, you know, I've been teaching for 17 years, and it just blows me away, like how amazing they are and how they really accomplish the goals that they set out to do. So having these programs in place is really the core that allows us to meet the needs of our kids in a way that I've never seen before. So I just think it's a really exciting time to be here. You know, just to be working with our students, and I see the work that the kids are doing. And when they come, because currently with our exclusive pullout model, when they come and work with me, at times in the past it seemed very disjointed. And now that, and we're just doing something different over there, and what is it? Nobody knows. It's a big mystery. But now that we have something really concrete to latch onto, it just makes our work so much more powerful.
And so I'm just going to show you a little clip, because we know, like, currently in our model, we sometimes say, like, oh, did we capture everybody? Do we have the students we need? And so I want to show you a little clip of a 5th grade classroom where, whether you were identified or not, how the needs of an advanced learner can be met in this current environment.
Teacher being a deliverer of instruction, a facilitator of instruction versus a deliverer of instruction. Most often we'll start our lesson with math talk and be a more open-ended type of opportunity for the students to be challenged by a new concept, and we'll have it be where it's kind of just a free-flowing exchange of ideas. How can we solve this problem? The students are comfortable enough to come up to the board, to share ideas with the class, with each other, in pairs, in small groups. So it's worked really well to get them to think creatively and collaboratively about math without me having to give them necessarily the instructions on how to solve it or how to, this is the steps in which we have to take to get to the correct solution. Because more often than not, the students will figure out good solutions on their own, and often that can be different than even what I envisioned for them.
So you can see by that example, even children who have needs at every level and along the continuum can really work at wherever they're at to get at a problem or to be a participant in that classroom. And oftentimes the students who are thinking outside of the box have other students to then bounce ideas off of, and it triggers this conversation at a much higher level in a general education setting. So these resources really do allow us to really differentiate that instruction in that way. So some of the new program elements that we're suggesting beginning next year, I really want to take some time to talk about. So we know that there are those few exceptions with respect to natural ability and aptitude that exceed same-age peers. We know there are kids out there who exceed their same-age peers, and these students do need avenues to be considered for accelerated opportunities on that continuum. And so the new school code legislation that's come forward around advanced learning also sort of speaks to this, in that you'll see policy likely in the fall of next year around accelerating students. And having Laura Belchenko sit on this advisory committee, we kind of have a little inside view of where that policy is headed. And we were able to incorporate that into some of our recommendations and with respect to our programming. And so one of the things that we've really looked at that is new is creating an early entrance process for kindergarten, much like the early entrance process to first grade. And you might think, oh my gosh, the floodgates are going to open. But that early entrance process is a quite rigorous one. The criteria for meeting that threshold is really for those students who are demonstrating that very high level aptitude that in a whole well-rounded way would be ready for grade acceleration. And there's a whole body of research within the criteria called the Iowa Acceleration Scale, which gives you all of the different pieces of the puzzle that you look at with respect to determining whether a child has that readiness for that level of acceleration. But we are recommending that we do incorporate that early entrance piece for those students who just fall so far outside of their peer group that they need to be considered for that. And then in addition to that, we also would use a similar process for a grade acceleration at any level when a child demonstrates that need for a full look, a whole child grade acceleration. We don't currently have a transparent process for evaluating students of that level of readiness. And so we're recommending that we put in place an acceleration policy that looks at that. As well as one for content acceleration, particularly in mathematics, where you have a scope and sequence that's predetermined in terms of readiness for the next level. And we currently have done that through our multi-tiered system of support, which you'll hear later. When we see students whose needs aren't being met, we have the ability to figure out different avenues for giving them that content acceleration and that readiness where and when appropriate. Those are those real exceptions to the rule. Those are those kids who are, as I said, far exceed the aptitude and abilities of their same age peers. So we did take that proactive approach with acceleration to incorporate those pieces into our recommended continuum of services. In addition, as we were looking at ways we could expand our programming and support students, our Library Resource Center directors, who happen to be in the audience, they walked in, Patty Perdanich and Ellen Nolan at the K-5 level. They also have this flexibility within their schedules where they're supporting general ed classrooms currently in sort of research, and they have open flex blocks where classes can sign up. And they have a real interest in expanding their role and their talents in supporting enriched activities within the general education setting. So they are actually signing up for the gifted seminar training this summer to be able to also get more knowledge around how they promote advanced learners and support them in classrooms. And they're also have taken some inquiry-based workshops around creating inquiry-based opportunities for research at that primary level with those K through 3 students. So they'll be able to work flexibly and can do some consultation with teachers and pull resources and support some of those avenues for taking the core, which Catherine already described to you, and extending it in different ways through their support and consultation. And then another new program element within the recommendations is a daily mathematics replacement for grade 4. Currently, our grade 4 students go out just once a week. But we are looking at sort of that readiness. And the recommended shift in grade 4 is because we know that math is a content area that requires prerequisite skills to have a readiness to be advanced. And we know that developmentally in 4th grade, there are many new standards that come into play, and kids have often an unevenness in their developmental readiness. And so we want to make sure, as Casimira mentioned, that we're developing that talent, that we're prepping students to access everything that they'd be capable of accessing. So our recommendation at grade 4 in mathematics is to really look at a unit by unit prerequisite and pretest students before the unit begins. And then if they demonstrate that mastery of what's about to be taught in that unit, then they would receive what they need, those services that they would need outside of the classroom in a replacement model for that unit. Some students may qualify every unit. Some students may qualify for certain units where they have those prerequisites in place, because the math strands, there are 5 of them: geometry, algebraic thinking, number sense, etc. There are areas where kids may have particular aptitude but not a readiness in another. So we're really looking at, again, meeting kids where they're at. And then lastly, as a new element, to provide a cohesive and more robust experience for grade 3 students, we're recommending a shift at that grade level to move to inquiry-based units of instruction that are co-taught in the general education setting with an advanced learning teacher coming in and working with a classroom teacher. And we're going to talk more about what that would specifically look like when we get to the grade 3 slides later on. I'm going to turn it back over to Casimira.
Grab that mic over there.
Oh, yes, sorry, I put it behind the projector.
We recognize that content acceleration, that students demonstrate that readiness for that at that developmental level, that's led to success in the grade 7 and grade 8 English language arts. Expanded criteria. This is a very important discussion as well, that we're not just looking at your standardized assessments, that there's more to a child than just that number or just that one point in time, that one measurement. And so looking at curriculum-based components as well. And then in addition to that, we're also looking at teacher and parent rating scales for those students who are demonstrating potential. So we're really trying to, we are going back to that whole widening of the net and really looking at, at all possible perspectives to see if children, qualify for that readiness or have that readiness. I know that we spoke a great deal about the focus of the whole child and the social emotional learning at our strategic update. And so that would also pertain to any student falling in the gifted category or the advanced learning or the acceleration, making sure that we're looking at their social emotional needs. Sometimes students that present with gifts and talents, there also might be things like anxiety, perfectionism, socialization with peers. Not all the time, but those things exist. And we want to make sure as educators that we're doing our due diligence and we're paying attention to those aspects. And then we also are expanding extracurricular opportunities, understanding that social connection with peers, that collaborative effort, the problem solving, just the daily interaction with peers and with other teachers and adults, that's so important and necessary for the child's overall development.
Okay, so as we move into sort of the nuts and bolts portion of the presentation, we provided you with definitions in your packet because we know sometimes terms aren't always clear to everybody, and we want to make sure that you have the background and understand how we're defining these terms as we talk about them. I'm not going to read them they're in your board packet and posted on the presentation, but multi-tiered system of support, I'm going to clarify that that's maybe what most of you may remember being referred to as response to intervention, or RTI. Multi-tiered system of support is a more comprehensive term that really talks about all students across that continuum, and Casimira will speak to that a little bit later as well. Early entrance is pretty clear cut. It's just if you have a birth date earlier than the typical criteria to start, first grade or kindergarten. And then we defined for you grade acceleration, content acceleration. We also are going to speak to inquiry and interdisciplinary, so interdisciplinary covering multiple content areas within an opportunity. And then we defined for you inquiry and separated out what problem-based learning is. And just for the good of the audience, a problem-based learning experience is when you pose a problem to the students and you allow them to explore various ways to answer that question or solve that problem. And the students get some choice in how they solve it. Inquiry is a little bit different in that the students can actually manipulate the question. They can branch off, identify their own question, and seek out an inquiry related to the problem-based question that you posed. So those are the differences. I just wanted to be clear about that. So those are there for you as we begin to get into the nuts and bolts of our recommendations. So back to Cassie.
I didn't know I was coming up so quickly. The definition, or a little bit of explanation about this. So this is the multi-tiered system of support. Diamond, it's actually kind of a rhombus, but we'll go with the diamond just for the sake of the argument right now. So this originally started or began as a triangle. So if you look from the center over to your left, and the backstory of that, and I had shared that with the Advanced Learning Committee, is that it also was part of the dental industry, and it was the problem of that people were experiencing problems with their teeth, and it was how do we prevent, the types of problems with that. And so it became something aligned to like, well, let's put fluoride in the water, and that took care of most people's dental concerns. That really alleviated some of the issues and the concerns. And so that would have been more in like that first level of that tier. And then there was other people that had needed more to be a little bit more proactive about their approaches. So they had more regular checkups or x-rays, for their teeth to keep their teeth healthy. And then you had the last level, the highest tier, the tier 3, and those are people that have ongoing problems with their teeth and they might need root canals and other things like that. But that was how basically this intervention system developed, and how do we intervene and provide people with the necessary supports to keep them healthy. And so the educational world looked at that in terms of providing students with interventions when they weren't mastering certain standards, or how do we help them or provide them with those extra supports. In 1983, with A Nation at Risk, and that report that came out, there was the argument and the debate that, well, we need to provide those opportunities for all students, and we need to make sure that every child, whether they're coming to us with needs or they're coming to us with advanced capabilities, that we are providing the opportunities for them to succeed to their utmost potential. And so this triangle became a very intentional diamond. And that is where we look at that tier 1 and the tier 2 and the tier 3 on the other end, where we look at how do we differentiate and how do we provide opportunities for students who come to us maybe already mastering certain content or having that readiness to do something more. How are we problem solving around that? So when we meet as educators and have regular meetings, we talk about our students using this type of model. Like, what are we doing to support all of our students? And these are the multi-tiered system of support, this model for discussion and for planning and for communication. That's what that is. It's us coming together and problem solving around students that need something different or need something additional or need something tweaked or scaffolded for them, whether it's to bring them up to the standard, or whether they come to us as what we're talking about this evening and they have the standard mastered, and now we have to take them further and we have to go deeper, or we have to give them more. And so this is something that comes up every 6 weeks formally when we meet together and we talk about our students and how they're performing. But this comes up in daily planning sessions with teachers when they're looking at their curriculum, and we talk about this with parents when we talk about what extra supports we're giving to students when they need something additional and something more. So this is basically just the model that as educators we look to when we have to determine the direction for what our students need.
Okay, so we're going to start. To come on up and about the middle school.
Hi, how are you? So there are no proposed changes at the middle school level in math. What we're doing right now, we plan to continue doing, which is grade level acceleration, and then to continue to look at double acceleration on a case-by-case basis. The thing that we were really focusing on with middle school was making sure that we're really widening the net and looking at all of the fifth graders. So we talked about how important that transition is, especially with grade level acceleration, that we make sure that we're catching the kids that we need to catch and that everybody is getting what they need. So that placement of students as they transition from the elementary to the middle school was the focus for us.
And right now, in our existing model, that it happened, but not as intentionally. It was almost like if you were getting services in fifth grade, you automatically got them in sixth. And we're suggesting that we relook at every fifth grader through a fresh lens before they hit the middle school, because we know if we place a student and they don't have that readiness, you never want to put a student in a position where they're not going to be successful or where they're going to feel like they're not able to keep pace with what's expected. And so that transition is super critical when you move from fifth to sixth and you're talking about skipping content as you're moving into the middle school. So for ELA, Kelly's going to come up and talk a little bit about that. Elizabeth Hayano couldn't be here tonight, so she's got to stand in.
All right. There are also no proposed changes to the middle school ELA programming. So there is no full content acceleration in middle school ELA. There's an advanced learning class for sixth grade. And like Deb and Meryl both highlighted, we're going to make sure to take a closer look at all fifth graders before coming into Hauser. And sixth graders will just be the advanced placement based on the recommendation with talking to the sixth grade team because of all the new standards. Seventh and eighth grade is a little bit more compacted curriculum. So seventh grade advanced learners do some of the eighth grade curriculum, and eighth grade advanced learners do some of the freshman and high school units with good communication between RB and Hauser.
And that was a new adjustment we began to make this year because there was a recognition that even within our existing Hauser program, some of our most advanced learners, we weren't growing as much as we would have liked. And so the eighth grade advanced ELA teacher, math already has a year of accelerated content. ELA didn't. They were going deeper. Why not accelerated content at grade 6? The grade 6 ELA standards have the largest amount of new standards to cover. And so they're being successful right now in sort of the introduction of all these new standards and taking the students more deeply to prepare them to accelerate their content. So they're still giving them more complex text, but the standards are also brand new in sixth grade that we need to make sure they're secure before we start accelerating content. What happens in English language arts in seventh and eighth grade is that the standards don't shift that much. There are very few new standards, but what happens is they expect you to increase your complexity in the text that you're tackling and go deeper. And so that's when it's appropriate to start accelerating that content. Okay, and so for grade 5 math, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Eddy, who currently works with our advanced learners in 5th grade.
Yeah, thanks. So currently in the 5th grade, currently in the 5th grade math program, students are formally identified. It is a 5-day-a-week, an hour a day pull-out program. So they're just with me right now for their entire instruction. So it's a compacted curriculum. We combined 5th and 6th grade standards, then sort of broke them into units, and then determined which of the 2 curricula that we're working with, Math and Focus for the 5th grade and Carnegie for the 6th grade, is most appropriate for each unit. And then, of course, there's pre-assessments at the beginning of each unit, and that kind of helps to determine which parts of that unit we'll spend the most time on, what we need to focus the most on, and in some cases, which students are, like if a student is coming in and on their pre-test, they're 90% or above, then they're going to be doing something completely different for that unit, or at least part of that unit, such as an independent project. And we also do inquiry projects as part of the whole group 5th grade curriculum. So there are no proposed changes to the 5th grade math at this time. And Rachel is going to talk about the 4th grade math program. Oh, sorry.
I'm going to chime in with one other comment on that. Thus the importance of relooking students at the end of 5th grade. So because our current program is compacted, we still need to see a mastery of 6th grade level material before they enter 6th grade math at Hauser. And because we're doing a compacted curriculum, we want to make sure that even the students coming out of that compacted program have what they need to be successful. So that's another reason we're relooking at all students, 5th to 6th.
Hello. So this is really exciting for me because I teach 4th grade for just a little while. I've been teaching 4th grade. So currently the 4th graders are pulled out once a week only for 60 minutes to get enrichment. It's not enough. So what we're proposing is that the students would be identified unit by unit, giving them a pretest. The pretest in elementary for math and focus is really a readiness test. So that if they pass that readiness test, then we would give them maybe another post test to see if they would go further. Is that what we were thinking, Meryl? Did I say that right? Okay. And then if we felt that they were good by that unit, then they would have daily replacement math every day for 5 days a week for 60 minutes. So that's super exciting for 4th grade. And it would be delivered by the advanced learning teacher. And we would do that every unit. So like Meryl said before, some 4th graders would maybe be with the advanced learning teacher all year, and some might be in for a unit and then not another unit, and so on.
But more importantly, that all the classroom teachers will have access to. This is an example of a type of task in 4th grade that even if a child did not pre-test and all of a sudden during the unit, the child demonstrated an aptitude, the classroom teacher is not going to say, oh, sorry, you didn't pre-test in. We're not going to meet your needs or grow you. We have opportunities through enrichment folders that we're creating for every unit at every grade level, K through 5, for the teachers to access the same kinds of tasks that the advanced learning teachers might be working with in an alternate setting for that unit. So this is just an example of a task. This is a culminating task where in 4th grade, students would be working with multiplying whole numbers and fractions, and it's a real life application problem. As you can see, I'm not going to go into depth, but it's about donating acres of land to the city council, and they want the land to be used for the public good, and there's different organizations that have proposed plans, and they get to go in and formulate possible solutions and how that land would be allocated by using the fractional information and the numbers that they're given. And so this is the kind of task where if you've mastered your standards, this is an application demonstrating that you have the knowledge to be able to apply that learning. This is another type of task in 4th grade. We're fortunate we work with the Midwest Consortium Mathematics Initiative out of UIC, and so we have access to this awesome resource where we can pull problems like this to supplement our math and focus curriculum, and they go right with our units. So we're creating these access folders unit by unit, chapter by chapter. This second task is what's called a 3-act task, and in these kinds of tasks that the kids could work on, and even in a general ed classroom, if you have 2 students working together, or the teacher could create that guided flexible math group for a student that needed it. You give the kids an anticipated question and you ask them questions they might want to answer. And you have some in mind if the students can't generate them. And then the kids have to look at the data that they're given based on that problem that was presented to them, and they have to determine some reasonable estimates of what their answer might be to the question they're generating. So again, you see the inquiry, the kids generate the question, and the kids get to estimate what the answers might be. And then Act 2 is you ask the kids to determine what additional information they might need to be able to solve and answer their questions, and then the teacher provides additional information. And then in Act 3, they share the solutions, discuss, and compare. And were they good solutions? They evaluate and judge. So these are just, there's a lot more to it than that. That is like the Cliff Note version of a 3-act task, but it's a lot of opportunity for collaboration and discussion and stretching your thinking and applying the knowledge that you have to this kind of work. And again, whether you're working outside of the classroom with an advanced teacher or you're demonstrating that aptitude in the classroom, general education teachers will have access to these resource folders for enrichment and also for intervention, unit by unit, grade by grade. So for ELA, I'm going to turn it back to Catherine and to Rachel to talk about English language arts.
So the current structure of support for 4th and 5th graders in ELA is that they work with the advanced learning teacher 3 hours a week, and we're not proposing any changes to that program. But one way that we can enhance this is by, again, having a program that we can ground our instruction in. In the past, what we've done is come up with resources that will meet these kids' needs, and now that we have such a robust program in place with ReadyGen, we're kind of inching a little bit dangerously too close to more work for the advanced learners instead of different work or better work, because what they're doing in their classrooms is pretty intense and pretty rigorous, and they're reading multiple texts. So to have them read additional texts with the advanced learning teacher is no longer meeting their needs the way that it was. So they're reading multiple texts in their classrooms, and then what the advanced learning teacher is going to be able to do is connect to those themes and support the skills that they're working on and just take it a few steps further. And if that might mean replacement texts, that might not. It might mean replacement tasks. It just depends on what the unit looks like at that time. Is this me? I can do this.
Well, it's just an example of a task from our actual program.
Right. So in 4th grade, they're going to be reading about earthquakes pretty soon. And then for accelerated learners, what they can do is they can create a brochure for people to detail what they should do before, during, and after an earthquake. And then we also have a resource called Define STEM that creates these real-world applications of tasks, and it requires them to use the skills that they're learning in the classroom and just taking it several steps further. And it's just creating a really nice, cohesive program so that even though it's still going to be a pull-out program, we're going to be working much more closely together to make sure that it's cohesive, that it has a place, that it serves a very defined and clear purpose. So I think that's something that all of us are really excited about.
And I think the other thing we're excited about, and I think Rachel spoke to this a little bit already, is that, again, if that child, for some reason, who shows aptitude maybe wasn't identified for that 4th grade pullout program, that accelerated learner task exists, again, in that folder for any classroom teacher to access and service students and meet their needs. And the great thing about that task is it can be inquiry-based. They can decide who that audience is in terms of keeping safe during an earthquake. Is it people who work in high-rise? Is it people in a neighborhood? Is it people who might be outside in the time of an earth? So they have to define what audience they're speaking to it's not just, oh, let's go research how to be safe in an earthquake. They actually have to define parameters and get specific to the audience that they're trying to respond to. Okay, so now we're going to move on. You see we're coming down the grade levels, and we're going to move into 3rd grade, and I'm going to turn it over to Angela Jagus, one of our 3rd grade teachers here at Ames, actually.
Hello, nice to see you all. So currently in 3rd grade, students are identified formally at the end of 2nd grade. And what's important to note is that at the end of 2nd grade, they're identified via some tools that may change when they come to 3rd grade in terms of having an assessment read to them and then having to read the assessment themselves. So there are some shifts in that assessing of students that we've seen that maybe at the end of 2nd grade, not all of our students are ready to show what they're capable of. Currently in math, they're receiving 1 day a week of 60 minutes. That's not even during, at times, our math block of time. So students that are leaving for this math enrichment are not even leaving during the math portion, which I'm actually so thankful about at Ames because they need to be in the classroom during that math time. And with our new proposed structure, they'd be taking that pre-test, that readiness test, and then if they show that they're ready to tackle the standards that are being taught, for that chapter, then a post-test or a performance task can be given, And based on their performance of that, with all of the plethora of resources from Math in Focus, we can now take all of the resources that we've been putting together and kind of deliver a very flexible program, individualized to them based on the standards they've met and showed success with based on their assessment, as well as maybe 1 or 2 lessons they need to jump back in with us, so that now this piece is super tailored to each specific student that needs acceleration, dependent on what standards they've secured and those that may be still a little bit shaky and they need some help with. So here's another example of performance tasks that can be pulled for students in the classroom in an independent time, as well as consulting with the teacher and conferencing to kind of further connect the standards that are being covered and have students dive deeper and challenge them further. These are examples of what's actually already happening in classrooms across the district, because Math in Focus is such a robust curriculum. So here's an example of Math in Focus tasks, the enrichment tasks, the performance tasks. Students are making independent learning logs, they're making agendas for themselves, they're checking in with their teachers, and they're being super flexible about getting what they need when they've mastered content and getting what they need when they still need a little help. And are we gonna play the little video? Here's an example of one student who's talking about, you know what, he took this post-test and he's pretty okay with joining the class. So that flexibility, he can show that at 8. So he's totally prepared to show his flexibility of getting what he specifically needs, because this is about meeting each student, not a group that's leaving the room at a certain time and maybe then missing some things along the way. It's super tailored. In ELA currently, students again are identified at the end of 2nd grade. They receive 180 minutes per week, and that's delivered currently by the advanced learning teacher. Using that multi-tiered system of supports, you know, we want to still identify students that could benefit from instruction beyond grade level expectations, but we've got ReadyGen, which we can, just like Math in Focus, tailor to students' individual needs inside the classroom. So as a classroom teacher, I can differentiate activities on a daily basis. While some students are answering specific focus questions, others are working on written performance tasks, and they're all addressing the same standard, but at students' individual needs. I would also be able to, we'd be able to consult with staff that's trained to get feedback on assisting these students in the classroom, so that not only am I just pulling resources from ReadyGen's variety of what's available, but I also have staff members to collaborate with in 3rd grade to build upon the continuum of skills and strategies and what's available. These are, sure.
Will you go back one slide real quick? You know, my name is Catherine Dykes. I know I was introduced, but I'm the advanced learning teacher at 2 of our schools, at Blythe and Hollywood. And when I work with my 3rd graders, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times it's a challenge for them to transition in and out like that, because what a classroom does, and I was a 5th grade classroom teacher for many years before stepping into this role, and you know, your subjects are defined, but nothing is taught in isolation, and everything that you do within a classroom just, you know, feeds and builds upon itself, and you refer to what you did the other day or earlier in the day. And for 3rd graders, it can be really challenging for them to transition in and out. And this year, as we've been working with ReadyGen, I'm finding that I'm using Ready Gen's materials with my third graders, and when I'm collaborating with the third grade teacher as much as possible, and what skills are you targeting during this unit, and what deficits are you seeing? And the students who are formally identified to work with me are challenged by this, and a lot of the material that I had used in the past couple years, I'm not able to get to, because we really have to hit these core skills. We have to hit them hard, because it's very robust, and it's meeting them where they are. So this is, it's been really nice to have the Ready Gen program to rely on, and it's meeting these third graders where they need to be, and where, it's just kind of, it probably sounds hard to believe, how can one tool meet the needs of all the kids, but it does. And for example, the writing is very heavily emphasized within Ready Gen, and so then you'll have a checklist of skills that you need to target within what you're working on, and you'll have a rubric. And so some students have mastered, like perhaps writing a strong introduction and naming your subtopics, and they need to really hit the transitional words hard. So using words like furthermore and things like that for a third grader, that's getting pretty advanced and sophisticated. So it's just, you're targeting what the kids need with this resource that we have, if that makes sense. Am I next too? Okay.
Well, the next slide just gives some examples. So these are actually some of the real life examples from the program from third grade. And we're not taking something away from third graders. It's that, and Catherine, I think you just said it really well. Prior to this adoption, we didn't have the plethora of resources within the general ed setting for a classroom teacher to just grab onto to be able to create a flexible, differentiated group and meet kids' needs in this way. It required sort of a novel study outside of the classroom or something of that nature. But this program really does meet the needs of the third graders in this particular area. So these are just, they read the story of the Lemonade War, and one of the opportunities for students would be to write a business plan for a product or service and identify, again, who they're marketing it to, who they'll sell it to, and have them develop that based on that audience and that location. So right there within the program, that's right within the manual, we would have this very well accessible to all of the teachers in these folders. And then the librarians, as I've shared earlier, are also consulting with this work and would be able to have the resources at the fingertips for the teachers to access to say, hey, if they want to research this, here are books and websites and resources they could go to. Similarly, this other task where they're reading about another culture, and then students get to choose a culture to research and take further and create an explanatory essay, as Catherine mentioned, the writing activity that takes third graders so much more into the depth and complexity of their standards within this program. So it's not that third graders are missing out on an experience. They're actually getting a much more robust experience every day in the classroom, which brings us to a shift in what we're recommending to enhance third grade. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly King for that.
All right, so this is kind of our new program initiative, how we'll be meeting the needs even more of all of our students in third grade. So kind of like Angela said, students currently are identified formally at the end of grade 2. We wouldn't be formally identifying students for ELA purposes at the end of grade 2. What I would be doing as part of my role, like Meryl mentioned, I'm tech integration, but kind of like we talked about at our board presentation at the beginning of the year, for us, tech use is so much about creation, not consumption. It's not how do we use tech, it's the design thinking, it's kids being engaged and passionate about what they're learning. So I'll be working with the third grade teachers this summer to write some inquiry-based units that all third graders will be participating in. And I'll work, there'll be one interdisciplinary unit, again, that covers multiple content areas, aligned to the NGSS, which is the Next Generation Science Standards, which has a lot of engineering practices. So again, getting kind of that STEM and that design thinking into the classroom, one per trimester, and I would be working in each classroom twice a week for 6 weeks. And really excited about that opportunity for our third graders to kind of take their learning deeper and more meaningful with the tech integration and design thinking in their classrooms.
Okay, so then our little guys, we're down to the bottom. We're getting there. So our little guys, currently we don't have any formal identification for our K-2 students, and our classroom teachers have been providing that differentiation. So I just wanted to remind you at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about those kids that are so far above maybe their peers and may need to be considered for something different. That's that acceleration piece that we talked about in early entrance piece, where we would be really looking to have an opportunity or a process for evaluating that readiness beyond what we can do in a classroom with all the differentiation that we just talked about. But then even with those talented students, those ones that we're trying to really developmentally reach, we're going to go back to that multi-tiered system of support that Casimira talked about and really look and identify. And our teachers are using that system really well to call out students. And I know in working with Patty and Ellen just recently, we were talking about students that they can talk about in each of those classrooms where when they're working on research projects in those grade levels that they know they're focused on extending and pushing along. And so those are some of those staff supports in that consultation to provide those appropriate differentiated extension activities. And again, having resources in math as well as ELA to do that. In Math and Focus, I mentioned our partnership with our math coach, we've been identifying problems even at the primary level that are going to be able to be accessed by every teacher for the younger students to, again, take that math knowledge and apply it if they've mastered those standards on some of those pre-assessments. And rather than sitting with daily instruction being their guided flexible group, we do use flexible grouping within all our classrooms. And so that higher ability learner, or that student that needs something more, meets flexibly with the teacher and gets direct instruction to tackle a task. And then the teacher lets them go and they tackle it, whether it's a partner, by themselves, in a group, and they check back in and they revisit how they've solved that problem and talk about their thinking. Similarly in ELA, again, acceleration for that out-of-the-box piece. The math interventionist can support math, the LRC, and ELA in terms of consulting and identifying those just right activities and those opportunities. And again, even in first grade, our ReadyGen program, a student in first grade who is a reader and writer and doesn't need to sit in a group to learn how to sound out words and learn how to decode and unlock text. They could be taking some books on birds and bats after hearing Stella Luna in their classroom and writing their own nonfiction book for their class and helping their class to learn more about what it is that they're doing. And again, my librarians, they keep shaking their heads because we said, okay, we'll create these enrichment folders, and they'll already know what resources they can point students to and say to a classroom teacher, here you go, have at it, and they can check in and help support that. And a second great example, the house on Maple Street, I just loved this example. Research Riverside and compare things in Riverside and share and work together to create a poster and share it with your classmates. And that just comes right out of those rich resources that we've already adopted, which again, in prior years, I would say in this district, there was probably a bigger need to say, what are we going to do with those little guys? Because we didn't have this kind of robust programming that we could go to give us these activities. So next steps, we're going to wrap it up. I know it was a little long, but there was a lot of work that's gone on in 2 years. It's hard to...
Thanks. So our next steps. Meryl and I have been sitting down and already talking about a communication plan development. So identifying dates that we would be able to go to each one of the elementary buildings and also Hauser, and then talk to parents in those specific schools about the new plan and answering their questions and making sure that we're carefully explaining. Obviously, this has been a very in-depth conversation and presentation to you, and so understandably, parents are going to have questions and want to know that information as well, and we want to be able to give that to them firsthand. We're also looking at, publishing all the information on our website so that it's easily accessible to parents, who at their touch of their fingertips can go and access and kind of do their own reading and their own investigation and research on what we're proposing for next year. Formalized program identification criteria in your board packets. It's very specifically outlined for you for early entrance and acceleration. But in general, it's just a more robust way of looking at students. We're not just examining the cut scores. We're taking into account into consideration what we're actually teaching and measuring that and seeing how the students are responding to that. There's also, as I mentioned before in the presentation, the addition of the parent and the teacher rating scales and really looking at, in all avenues and all possible ways of, are we really meeting students' needs and how are we pushing them to that next level? students in the current grade 3 and 4 Quest program will be looked at in a new matrix. And if any kind of discrepancies emerge, the building teams are going to be meeting with parents, and we'll take those problem solving into consideration as we brainstorm what we're going to be delivering for those students, and any type of social emotional implications that arise, as well as the academic. And at grade 5, all students will be reevaluated for placement, so that we have a well-fit match as they enter middle school. That's it.
The matrices and the acceleration procedures, they're in your packet currently. They're not on public view because we wanted to feel the board out on sort of the whole recommendation before we put that out. They'll be, if we have support and endorsement, we will obviously release them right after in terms of how those pieces of the puzzle work. But one of the things I wanted to mention with respect to that is because the scenarios we created now have many different ways to look at a child, including a parent and teacher rating scale in addition to curriculum-based performances and achievement performances, we would only really need that aptitude, that ability assessment, the COGAT that we currently administer in grades 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. We would only need to administer that in grades 3 for a formal entry point in grade 4 and 5, and grade 5 for the formal transition to the middle school. Because after that point, the appeals process takes into consideration alternate assessments that do the same thing. And also, there's other measures for students in the in-between grades to qualify without having to have a COGAT score. So there are opportunities to deal with that COGAT score in different ways beyond those 2 formal points of entry. And we wouldn't need to test our students as much as we currently do because most of our criteria, the majority of it, all of it at elementary and most of it at middle, is based on just standardized test scores at the moment without all those other pieces. So that sort of concludes the depth of the presentation. I just want to emphasize again, and Martha started this way, I'm going to end this way. We really tried to create a continuum of services where we really had opportunities to look at kids in lots of different ways to make sure that we're giving students the best opportunities to develop their potential and for us to create a program that meets their needs. So with that, we will open it up to questions, comments, so that we can get a sense of where we go from here.
So basically the model, the program is not adding any teachers or, I mean, it's a, you know, using the current resources we have.
It's sort of expanding some of the opportunities. Like Kelly's already doing some of that inquiry type of learning. So using her more intentionally rather than just teachers signing up.
Yeah.
And the LRC directors, they do some of that research piece, but again, piggybacking intentionally to create those opportunities to support further.
Right, and so then the advanced learner teachers like that do grade 3 where there's no formal entry, in that grade they would be support and consultation.
They will do some consultation, but if you remember what we did in grade 4 mathematics, we increased that to daily. So that where they were working in 3rd grade and sort of that pullout.
Right, because it used to be,
that
currently
defined
is
time,
one time a week at 4th grade.
So some of that defined time shifts to 4th grade mathematics. But then we also are creating those consultation within our planning day too.
So just making sure like there would be no change in staffing, like our advanced learning teachers will still be our advanced, you know. Okay, I just want to, perfect. Thank you. That's my question.
There's a lot of commentary about how ReadyGen and Math in Focus are almost more rigorous, more demanding at the earlier grades, and that's part of the reason why it's possible to
meet the needs.
Find greater ability to serve the advanced learners in the existing classrooms.
Absolutely.
Is that a good summary?
That is accurate, yeah. Mr. Marhol, you bring up exactly the point that this committee discussed was prior to having those resources, there wasn't this breadth of fingertips, right? Teachers did what they had to do, but it took a lot of time and energy to go and figure out what it is you were going to do when you had an advanced learner. So you're maybe less likely to be able to robustly address that. So maybe you were doing it here, and then it went a few weeks and you weren't doing it again until you had the time to pull something. So this is sort of at your fingertips. And one of the things that the committee decided was that this summer, through grant dollars, we're able to have teachers come in and, through our grant, get the enrichment folders built for every single unit, so the teachers won't even have to go through their TE, their teacher editions, to find the resource. Like, we are going to say, Unit 1, Module A, ReadyGen, Grade 2. Here are all the enrichment tasks from your teacher's edition. Here's a click to link of the folder. Here are some resources that you might consider using. So it'll be very easy for all teachers, whether they're at K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to access that for any child that might need it across the board. But yes, I would say that prior to having core resources, there was a little, and I'm looking at the teachers, there's a little more time demands to be able to get at those needs and really meet them. And the other thing is the acceleration piece. We weren't looking as intentionally as a district at acceleration opportunities. There wasn't this transparent process for saying, like, oh, if you're a second grader and you're really demonstrating this aptitude and you need third grade math, we didn't have a vehicle for figuring out how to determine whether that was appropriate. And we have systems now. And I sort of, through MTSS with some of the principals and some of the current students, we actually implemented that because we needed to, because it was part of MTSS, and we had some students that were in 3rd and 4th grade, now are currently in 4th and 5th, that demonstrated this out-of-the-box need in mathematics, and we didn't have a program necessarily, right? So we created a system where we could deliver those services and meet those needs. So this is sort of like formalizing that and saying, hey, this worked. Why aren't we transparent in doing this, you know, as part of our continuum of services across our system?
Sorry, you guys. You were talking about going to a gifted program this summer. Is that part of the building the folders, or is that separate?
That's a separate like seminar, just to give some more background and training.
And that's what it sounded like, but I'm just curious.
Professional development, because then they can consult with teachers and say, oh, this might be a good way of going about using that task with these kids. More like learning styles, strategies, some of the social emotional pieces that come with meeting the needs of a gifted learner or an advanced learning student. So you get some more information about strategies. And so Kelly has been through the seminar. Catherine and our current advanced learning teachers have that seminar background or formal gifted training background. So we want anyone who's consulting with our teachers.
And I should have said learning resource.
Learning library
resource
center directors. Yeah. Other?
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
It's just, with regards to ReadyGen and math time, it's not necessarily just the rigor. That is a huge part of it, but it's also the amount of material that's built into the program. If you were to teach every aspect of the program, it might take you 3 years at grade level, and that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I don't know, Rachel, not much. So as teachers, you're picking and choosing what's going to meet your kids' needs. But like Meryl said, it's at your fingertips. It's not like, okay, well, my kids mastered this text and this skill, now what? And you're going online and you're spending a lot of time finding something that can maybe fit, whereas everything right now does fit, and it's thematic based to reach those skills, and you just pull the part that you need to meet your kids. So you might be using this part of ReadyGen for this group over here, and then there's this other idea within ReadyGen to meet this group over here. So it is the rigor, but it's also, it's just, you know, we keep using the same adjectives, but it's a really robust program, that the resources are there. And that's been one of the biggest challenges of our job, the advanced learning teachers, is that we're just searching for something to meet their needs and trying to make it fit and make it connect. And we're doing a good job, I think, but it's not as cohesive as it could or as it should be. So that's a big part of it as well.
It's good to hear this because it does support, it's an inadvertent endorsement of the investment in these resources, because it wasn't insubstantial, but it's good to hear it kind of on a continuing basis.
And it was nice to hear it through the committee, to be honest with you, right? Because I can only facilitate, but when they're coming to the table saying, I don't need to do that because I have this, it's nice to hear that from the teachers. And I think part of what you saw and where we're saying those formal points of entry, like for determining continuums of services, is also about developmental readiness, making sure we're not cutting off an opportunity for a child too early and creating those kind of pocketed, identified pockets before we really have pushed through that talent development and saying like, okay, yeah, when they're getting a little bit older in the intermediate grades, there's more of a reason to start to pocket it out. And then at middle school, everyone should have that second opportunity to be looked at because that's a big leap when you're going from 5th to 6th. Laura, did you?
Everybody's looked at
every year, but formally. Everybody's looked at every year, but that formal leap.
And they don't grandfather.
There's that, yeah, that readiness piece is really, I think developmental readiness was an emphasis of this group.
I just had a few questions. First of all, thanks for the presentation. You guys obviously spent a huge amount of time on this. Thought very carefully about all these issues, which is great. It seems like a very interesting approach. Just had a couple questions. One is, in practice, I mean, if you're trying to figure out where every kid needs to be, and you have 22 kids or 23 kids in the class, like how do you practically keep track of all that? I mean, every kid is at a different stage. Like, how do you do that in practice?
So I just want to make sure I understand your question. So, like in a regular classroom today, how am I doing that?
Well, basically, I thought maybe I didn't understand exactly, but I thought one of the points was that you have a continuum basically, and you're trying to basically at the lower grades basically to challenge every student at the level they find themselves at, and so that both for the kids that are maybe not doing so well and the kids that are more advanced, you're trying to target things for each of them. But it seems like that'd be kind of hard to do if they're
it's really hard to do. We'll talk about that later, Mr. Miller, but at another meeting that we'll be at. But well, I think I can refer back then to ReadyGen, is because of the program, it makes it a little bit easier because there's so many different ways. I mean, the program builds in all of that. Like, there's ways to help kids that are struggling, there's ways to enrich kids that aren't, and it can be a continuous. And what else I've noticed, at least with the 4th graders, is it's also very self-motivating. Like, I might have a group of kids that I'm giving an extra project, I don't want to say extra, an enrichment project to, and some of the other kids who I didn't think were ready for it see them doing that, and they become motivated to do it themselves. And so these aren't kids that maybe necessarily are going to go see Mrs. Dykes, but they're getting some enrichment within the classroom because of the beauty of ReadyGen. And Math and Focus too. I mean, there's a lot in Math and Focus that you can adapt and change and work with. Was that your answer?
Yeah, no, that's...
So when I was speaking about that, the MTSS diamond, so every 6 weeks, our staffs get together and we meet, and it's the grade level teacher, it's the school psychologist, it's resource teacher, it's the advanced learning teacher, it's the EL teacher. We bring all these teachers together and we look at our students, we look at every single one of them, and we look at their data and we talk about how they're progressing in the classroom. And that's a very formalized check-in. But in addition to that, like I can speak for Blythe right now. Every Wednesday, we're in the library, every single teacher together, and we're bringing our math assessments, we're bringing our reading assessments, and and the classroom teachers are meeting with different resource teachers and support staff and talking about the kids and saying, this is how they responded to this assessment. What are we doing this week? Who's going to be coming in? Who's going to be pushing in? If we're working in groups and breaking them up? How are we delivering math instruction this week? How are we curtailing the instruction or scaffolding it to support this group? How are we enriching these students? And we're just sharing and constantly talking. I mean, that is a huge, huge process of what every teacher in every school is doing right now. And that's when Rachel says it is hard and it is complex. It really is. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's just ongoing, constant discussion and communication among the teachers. And they've been doing just a really phenomenal job of that.
And I think the last piece of that puzzle, Dr. Miller, is that these resources have pre-assessments. that we actually can administer to determine that readiness and see where kids are at. So that also helps guide the instruction. We use a lot of flexible grouping, and so it's not, it used to be you stand up, teach the whole class. Now it's you might stand up and teach the whole class for 15 or 20 to get a concept out, but then you're going to break into flexible groups based on those levels that they are sharing.
So, I guess so that's interesting. Thanks very much for that. It's interesting to know how that's done. Two other questions. One is something that Ms. Dykes said about Math in Focus, about how much material there is in that program. And that makes me wonder about something which is homework. I know there's been some research, some randomized controlled trials of homework. It's not been a lot. And from what I gather, most of the material says that homework is basically useless. It doesn't help kids at all in elementary school and middle school and high school. Maybe not high school, but with one exception, which is in the subject area of mathematics, where the few sort of randomized controlled trials that have been done sort of consistently show that mathematics homework does actually benefit kids. The English homework doesn't help socially, but math homework does, and I think it has to do with this idea of practice. And I'm wondering, did you consider that element at all in your studies? You know, whether there's a place for math homework, and I'm not talking about 2 hours a night in the elementary school, but just 5 problems a day or something like that. Is that
I think that's more of a general education sort of discussion in terms of how you supplement and practice what you're teaching in the classroom and how that plays itself out. Homework was not a focused discussion as part of the advanced learners in terms of how we're programming for in school. Because
well, I don't know how much to get now. I guess that's my question.
Too much, but I guess if you're thinking about the advanced learners, that's a different conversation. But in elementary school, you have to be very cautious. I don't like to send homework home if I don't feel that my students can do it independently at home. And so if I feel like they haven't mastered that skill, then I definitely don't want to send something home for them to do. But the advanced learners, that might be a different situation. Maybe they might get different types of homework because they have met that skill. So I think homework could also, fit into that situation depending on what your skill is.
Okay. And then I guess my third question is, again, it's sort of math related, which is, did you look at all that, like, I know there's some software, computer programs out there that, are supposed to be tailored to self-study for kids that maybe are more advanced. And you can sort of go online and it gives you a problem and you can see how you do on it. I imagine it's sort of similar to the math test. You can they can gauge your level. Did you look at all into that that kind of programming? I don't know what the status of that is nowadays, but.
we have some resources right now that are supplemental that we can do some of that with. We have the 10 Marks program where students can get assignments above where they currently are. 10 Marks is owned by Amazon and they're not going to continue to support that after 1819 because Amazon, that's a whole business story about education versus business. However, Mrs. Flatty also uses Khan Academy in her classroom where she has parent permission, and that's another resource that can be utilized to do that. We'll be looking at additional software resources for that exact purpose now that we know we're not going to be able to have 10 Marks for the long term. 10 Marks was very successful educationally, it's just that it wasn't backed from a business perspective. So someone's going to pick it up, I don't know who, but I can't wait for that because just to your point, there are supplemental, and that would be a supplemental opportunity. You don't want to replace the flexible group of the teacher and the advanced problem-solving opportunities that those problem tasks I showed you present, because those are really robust opportunities to stretch kids' thinking. But certainly from a supplemental perspective, we have used resources to do those things within our current classrooms. And there's a resource from Carnegie called Mathia that we did look at in the fall, but actually the middle school math interventionist felt that 10 Marks was equally as robust, but now we may go back to relook at Mathia.
Thank you.
President Miller and members of the Board of Education, I just want to share with you what an amazing opportunity that I've had over the past almost 2 years with this wonderful and very dedicated group of educators, administrators, and parents. And board members as well. This has been a journey that I have felt is probably among the best I have ever worked with, and I have done many gifted reviews across the state of Illinois, north, south, east, and west. The dedication of this group was phenomenal. The research that I had them read was quite extensive. They read, they came to the table. We had a lot of cognitive dissonance about it, discussing different aspects of it, looking backwards, forwards, up and down. Meryl mentioned this earlier. We poked holes in everything, looked at past practice, looked to the future of what college and careers is looking for. And as a result, I believe that this community has created a program, and I don't want to call it a program, I want to call it a continuum of services. And I use the word program first because that's what we're used to. But what was created here is a continuum of services for students with a dedicated group of teachers that are willing to do what's best for children. And I can't honestly say that I hear that everywhere. Teachers in this district, administrators, have put the children first. And I think as myself being on your side for 24 years as a board member in Libertyville, Illinois, I understand what your roles and responsibilities are. And I know how difficult it is to make decisions. But I want to share with you the decisions that you made to create a robust core curriculum is excellent. And now what you're doing is you are enhancing it with a continuum of services to meet the needs of all children across the board. So I want to say congratulations to this group. It has been my extreme honor to be part of it and to listen to their outcome with Meryl, who has been a phenomenal leader of this group as well as Casimira. And then again, everyone jumping up to the plate and being part of this team. Sherry, thank you for being part of this committee as well. Your input was extremely valuable, looking at it from your board perspective as well as from a parent perspective. It was very highly thought of and very, again, this was rigorous, this was robust, but it was a rising rambler type of outcome. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this. I really appreciate it.
And Lisa's here representing the rest of the parents who weren't here tonight.
Well, I just want to thank Ms. Belchenko for her comments, and I also would like to say that one thing I think that was really good about this, I'm not sure it's not the intention, but the fact that you guys figured out a way of doing this without increasing the number of staff and costing our cost, which is great, because it's very easy to look at something and say, we should go and hire 5 more people, but obviously that approach is not sustainable. And the fact that you guys managed to come up with something like this without, increasing the cost, I think is wonderful.
Yeah, I can't say that was really robust, and we started with maybe more staff, and we realized that maybe it wasn't sustainable, and we really dug deep and said, who are these amazing, talented people that we could really maximize their work.
I hate to be anticlimactic. I would like to ask a very dumb question.
There are no dumb questions.
Oh, this one might be. We'll see. So in terms of, one of the bullet points talked about grade and content accelerations. I get content acceleration. So grade acceleration, we're essentially talking about
grade skipping.
Grade skipping, double promotions. I guess that just stood out and kind of knocked around my head a bit, because it just, I can't tell you where I've heard this, but just to me that seemed like something that's not done that much anymore.
So let's talk. You want to speak to that, or you want me to? So that's actually, right? Exactly.
What's that?
Yeah. And the research actually is counter to that.
Really?
Mm-hmm. There used to be this myth or this misnomer that socially and emotionally it would do damage to students. But given the right tool and the right criteria, and if you saw in your packet like that long list, it's not just that you take any child and say, oh, you're going to go to 2nd grade. You're looking at aptitude, you're looking at achievement, you're looking at ability, you're looking at social emotional readiness, you're looking at the child's willingness to want to go. So the child plays a role in sort of, if you're looking at a child in 2nd grade and they thinking about putting them in 3rd and they say, I don't want to leave my friends, that's like a showstopper, because that is the social emotional piece. And then you have to find different ways to meet that child's needs. But yes, Mrs. Cliver's right. People were told in the past all kinds of things that aren't that don't ring true in the research. So that grade acceleration piece really needs to be, and as part of the policy that's coming out, and Laura can also reaffirm that, but needs to be done well and done right with a robust set of criteria to make sure you're making the right decision for kids. Do you want to add anything?
Although in your press packet tonight were the different policies that you were approving for this evening, coming up soon in a new press packet will be the new Illinois acceleration bill that was passed based on a long research study that was called Accelerate Illinois. And based on that, on this long longevity study, the research did come out and show from the Bell and Blank Center in Illinois, from a gentleman by the name of Nick Colangelo, and a plethora of researchers that did finally come up and find that accelerating students in above without just not being with their age and grade peers, but by actually accelerating them one grade level, maybe even above that, did not in fact harm the child. So again, as Meryl mentioned, if it's part of the student, the parent, and the school district to determine if and when a student will in fact be accelerated based on specific criteria with a core group of people that will review this very extensively. But we have tools that will help us to determine that, which is a very quantitative but qualitative way of being able to look at the student acceleration.
I still have one question, just for being on the committee, and thank you to everyone who's on. I think we spent, I don't know how many hours, so, especially for the teachers during the day. I know that's a lot to go back to room. I guess I'm trying to figure out, since we're not a state with IEPs for gifted students, how do we reconcile those educational goals for those top 3 to 5% children? How do we make sure? Because we provide services on the other end of the spectrum, I'm trying to figure out what is in our plan to support the parent input and communication that might normally happen during an IEP meeting and process, but we don't have that for those students that we're talking about. Are there any talks about that with administration?
So I think a couple of things. I think through MTSS.
We don't have the state telling us we have to do so, and or nor the money from the state.
Yeah.
So
we talked about our MTSS process and how we have letters and communication that goes to parents for students receiving the remedial support. We would want to create similar communication vehicles for students at that other end. And I think also, to your point, Sherry, a part of the reason that acceleration piece was so important to this committee was some of those kids that are at that higher end might be some of those students that might need that content acceleration, or
even just something in their plan where the parent does get to meet. I was wondering, and that in the future, is it something that gets talked about? Because it's not, it could be a behavior plan mixed with content. It could be,
and that's through MTSS. We have meetings with parents whose students are identified for those tiers.
Right. That's what I think was missing for me in the meetings. I don't feel like we got to that place yet. But that would be.
We talked about that sort of in our conclusion in the February meeting, how we would notify as part of our MTSS parents on the higher end of the spectrum, as well as parents at the upper.
And I just have one more question about the pretest. What happens if, for some reason, the student, you're taught the unit before and something about the way it was taught just didn't click for them, and they're kind of floating in and out of this groove, like in 4th grade? What do you do?
For mathematics?
Yeah.
Each unit in mathematics, and Rachel can speak to this too.
When does teacher input or instruction, also call it instruction, interplay with that? Yeah.
We do meet every week to talk about all students, and we also have 6-week check-ins for the MTSS process, and so this would also now become part of that conversation, the advanced learning side. Okay. If I'm understanding your question, you're saying, like, what if they didn't do well on the pre-test, but then as we're continuing the unit, I'm seeing, well, then I think that's very clearly a conversation that I could have with Mrs. Dykes and say, hey, you know what, maybe this kid needs to join you right now because...
Yeah, I don't know.
But that's the beauty
I think
of
that's
the
one
program.
part that could be confusing.
We can't do that
as a parent, it could be really confusing. Is my child going this week? Is it not? I'm really not sure yet. I'm not sure that's robust enough for me, but...
And that very well may happen. I mean, there might be a student who just didn't do well on that pre-test, so I did not give them the post-test, but as we're continuing the unit, I might say, you know what, I'm going to give it to them again and see how they do, and then have a conversation with Mrs. Dykes and
And there
say,
are some units that are scaffolded that would, you know, like this unit would link to this unit, and that would be a requisite, like you would want to see that. But then there's other units where the standards aren't necessarily based on the unit.
Right, like when I teach chemistry, you have to have certain algebra skills, but I guess my point is if they have certain cognitive ability, but for some reason the pretest doesn't show that, where do you reconcile the IQ cognitive place with the in practice that week? Yeah, and that's where the IEP would have been helpful, I think, but it is what it is.
But I think teachers, like Rachel said, could recognize that, and then you give them the performance assessment anyway, right? Because there's a second piece to that pre-assessment. There's the readiness, but then there's the end of unit performance assessment, and you can administer that at any point in time when you start to see a child that might need something different. I think that's that continuum piece, that flexibility piece. You know, our teachers are our best source of information. And I can't say that I have a teacher right now that would not lobby for a child. And I think Catherine, you think
and that's part of one of the limitations to our programs right now is that with this formal identification, and this is the group all year, every week, our criteria is published as it should be, and we're transparent. And so if you have a student who really would benefit from some enrichment, but they don't have the required scores, how do you justify putting them into this program with this very concrete, these specific requirements? Because then you're opening the door to, well then, are there other students who need that? So the direction that we're heading actually allows for that to happen more than how it currently is.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just wonder how it's manageable with the differentiation. I think one part that I still wish I would have heard more about on the committee was like the cluster models and things like that Laura had talked about, where you have kind of a lesser of a continuum of types of ability in one classroom. And I think that's something that I think we could have talked about. So I would have liked to learn about.
So in a single section school, that's obviously difficult. You can't.
I'm not
but in the multi-section
it's perfect
schools,
for every building. I'm just saying I would have liked to learn about it.
In the multi-section schools, I don't think it needs to be a formal conversation in the advanced learning committee, but what principals are trying to be cognizant of is that continuum of learners within a heterogeneous group. So we always talk about we can still create heterogeneous groups and try to maintain as closely as possible 3 bands versus 5 bands, right? And trying to do that in different ways. So that conversation, while it happened here but didn't formalize here, I think it has formalized at the leadership level to say we want to be cognizant of creating as much manageability as we can, but still maintaining.
Right, because I mean, I feel for you guys, like, how do you differentiate for 22?
So, and then you have the student that moves in and throws it off. So, you know, we'll be as cognizant as possible around.
single section schools too?
No, I just would have been interested in general, you know.
Because single section schools, we do it. I mean, it's not as easy, I don't think, as it would be in the multi-section schools, but we cross grade level.
I get it.
And so that's how we try to do it the best we can. But it's challenging.
I know. I'm not saying it's perfect. I just think that would have been fascinating to talk about.
Well, it is still, I mean, it's best practice for all kids. So the administrative team is committed to that for all populations, for our English language learners, for students with IEPs, so that it's just called different things in different circles. But that's already being done in the multi-section schools.
As much as we can.
Does anybody have any questions that you somehow didn't think of or thought of? Rich, nothing? Quiet? You're good. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, for coming.
It looks great. I would just say, like, just kind of making my own chart as you're going along, like where the changes are, where they aren't. I really appreciate that, a few years ago, before I think any of us were on the board, they made the change to like the 5-day-a-week math for the advanced. I think it's great that the things that are working were not touched with, and it feels like the rest of it was just kind of built up a little bit, which I appreciate for all learners. So I think looking at it, like going through it's hard with slide before you guys talked, was a little bit like, I'm not really sure what's going on here, but as you're talking and creating the chart, like I think it looks really great. And I can tell you guys took the time, and it feels very tailored to us which
Thank
is
you.
fantastic.
With the board supports, I mean, that's part of what Casimir was talking about, a communication plan. And we talked a lot about that as the parent rep. I'm going to look at Lisa and at Sherry, because we don't want to roll this out and just be like, here, read about it, which is why if we were to move support, if we're
And I think the board should, I think it would be helpful for them to hear about the criteria more.
Right, and that would be part of those parent meetings.
Yes.
So if we feel supported and endorsed by the board, we actually already pre-identified dates should we be able to move forward. And we will host information meetings at all 4 campuses, and anyone can attend any of them. And we will actually go through the same presentation, but more in depth with the criteria as well, and the processes for acceleration as well as placement, so that we can really answer specific questions and talk through all of those procedures and processes. The rating scales, we just identified with the researchers over spring break that were the best tools that had the least amount of bias that would really support
Right, I was curious about the educator tools plus the parent input. What does that mean? And is there
So
a
they're rating,
portfolio? What does that mean?
So the rating scales for teachers and parents are research-based rating scales that are being recommended by gifted researchers.
And are there behavioral, and we had talked in the committee about, there are indicators that you notice in the classroom for a child exhibiting certain behaviors.
They're comprehensive.
Could the board see those tools? I think that'd be nice for them.
Yeah, so
they're not in the classroom and they don't know what that means.
Right, so we just ordered the tool, and that will, that will be a transparent piece, and we have it, and it has all of what you just mentioned. So it has behavior.
And the parents often are sometimes the first ones to identify that their child, something is up. And so I think it'd be nice to see how a parent might write or be part of that process.
What those characteristics are.
We don't have, all the same procedures, so.
Right. So all those pieces will be part of these information meetings that we would roll out beginning in the next 2 weeks if we have support.
Really quick question, just thinking about it. So when you were talking about grade acceleration, like kindergarten, would that be?
The criteria is going to be released and transparent and clear, because when you start to read down it, you're like,
because that could affect,
right. And it's a very high
deadline of September 1st.
and it's a very high threshold for early entrance. Just to give you an example, the ability threshold is a 130 individualized IQ test, and that comes after we do a bunch of other achievement measures. And in your process, it actually outlines all the steps in that process. So we would transparently
this coming year.
Right, so we would transparently post all that so parents would understand and be able to filter. And when they call me, I walk through that. I do that now with first grade, and I get to a certain point, and then I typically get okay, and we can meet the needs in the classroom, so.
Great. I'm glad it's moving forward.
Yeah, I know the psychologist used to administer the Wechsler under certain requests.
That's why there's some you'll see like level 1 benchmarks and then level 2. So we won't have psychologists administering individualized tests until we go through the first set of screeners.
Or if they I would hope they would, though, if they wanted some kind of summer support and the parent wanted to take them to an institution separately.
Private testing. We always consider private evaluations.
Because not everyone has access to pay for those services.
Well, we do the testing if the child meets the thresholds. That's
right.
Why
No, I'm not even talking about the school year. I'm just saying if they want to send them to a program. So, thank you.
Well, thanks very much, and
Thank you
for coming on and staying so late.
Thank you, teachers.
You haven't, trust me, they've been through 2 million hours. This is
So I guess we come to the final committee meeting.
I don't know why people are leaving. Interesting stuff coming up here.
Teach in the morning.
The discussion item is the memorandum of understanding for the work here at Ames. If you had a chance to read through that memorandum of understanding from DLA Architects, in summary, what it calls for is the, let's see here, the conceptual design of the addition here, and there's also an accelerated time schedule there, a project schedule, which culminates with a board presentation on August 1. And then the structure for compensation is time and materials with a not to exceed. Are there any board comments or questions about that?
How doable do we think the schedule really is?
I think we can do it in this August
Well, Joel,
That's a rhetorical question to some degree. It's an aggressive schedule, like you said. Sorry,
what
but
it
go
is
on.
is it's conceptual designs. We're not coming up with construction documents or anything like that.
Right, she's got a different definition for design drawings than I'm used to. That's true. Thank you.
Right. So to clarify on those definitions, you can go back to the base AIA document. I think the compensation in here really protects the district. If we pay attention to the time and materials, we're paying for what we get at that point.
I agree. I think it's fine. I do think that maybe we should ask the architect to be a little more on time. I know she kind of got off the schedule last time with the first phase of the thing. So if you think we can hold her to something like this, I think it would be good. And if it's not possible, it's not possible. But I don't want to rush it, obviously. But
the important aspect to this is that it goes back to committee, I think. I think that helps expedite the process because the committee is able to meet, on a more frequent basis than the board is.
Well, no, I agree with that. But I think the last process she had from January to June, but I think we actually got the final report in February. So.
Yeah. No, you're right. Any other comments? Mr. Holmes, anything to add that we may have missed here?
Not that portion.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. So moving right along to facility updates. That's where I think we'll need your help on that, Rob. So Blythe Park roof update as well as 92 Repton demo update.
So for the Blythe Park roof update, the notice to proceed was issued to Ellens and Macon so that they could start ordering supplies, materials, and also get the subcontractors all lined up. And then they did return the owner-contractor agreement to the district, and the district has that. And then there is going to be a meeting, a pre-bid meeting set up with everyone, with the architect and all the parties in May. So that's the update that I have for the Blythe Park roof.
Very good.
And then the update for the Repton Road is there's basically three things going on. There's a topographical survey where they'll do that survey, and also they'll look at service lines and where to tap those out, and they'll work with Julie on that. And then there's the environmental survey, which will look at whether asbestos needs to be removed. And then the third thing is working with the village to ensure that all the documents needed and the timeline is copacetic with the village. And that all those things should be completed within the next several weeks.
So do you have a sort of an estimate for when the demolition might occur, a rough estimate? Or?
That would probably be towards the summer.
Okay.
Assuming everything goes as planned.
Any other questions from Mr. Holmes on those two updates? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
So then long-range facilities is another
I think just
add-on
keeping
here.
it there as a
Placeholder?
Yeah, placeholder, it's important. If there's any other conversation the board wanted to have, we are going to have a facilities advisory committee meeting tomorrow morning. And our goal is to really, kind of move forward with as, Rich said, I think for the committee to kind of be able to move the timeline as much as the committee possibly can, I think is important in terms of the process steps.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Anything, any other comments, questions? All right.
All right, thanks, Rich. So then the future meeting dates are April 18th, 2018, 7 p.m. at Hauser, regular business meeting. May 2nd, committee of the whole at 7 p.m. at Blythe. May 16th, regular business meeting at Hauser. Is there any other business? No other business?